Welcome to the Future Work, a series where we're focusing really on how do we actually improve the prospects of independent workers going forward as their numbers burgeon in the coming decades here. I'm Pete Leiden. I'm the founder of Reinvent, the media team that's actually driving a lot of this conversation. And today we've got Patrick McKenna, who's a serial entrepreneur who has actually been in most of his companies. He's co-founded 4 companies. Most of them, 3 of the 4 of them, had a lot to do with leveraging the powerful advantages, actually, of independent workers. He's up to his eyeballs in understanding how that works. He's also a kind of a early stage investor, tech investor, and he's got a lot of ideas on the next rounds of where good money would go and how you actually invest in the next generation of workers. So great to have you here.
Thank you.
It's good. So talk a little bit about your background so we just understand through the lens of people who are trying to wrestle with independent workers, the pros, the cons, the difficulties. Give a little sense of what you've done in that space, starting with, I guess, live ops, or you may tell the story how you'd explain it.
Well, I think at this point I've developed this expertise in distributed work and customer service and BPO and global workforce, and the question I ask myself is, how the heck did I get this expertise?
Mm-hmm.
It was not obvious. I grew up in a small town, went to college on a full ride scholarship, served in the Army, went to graduate school, and then I was an investment banker at Morgan Stanley in New York City. And after a couple of years of grinding that out and deciding that I wanted to try my hand at something different, I got a call one day from an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, a friend, somebody I'd gone to college with, who said, "Hey, I've raised a bunch of money. I'm starting this company. It's a benchmark funded company. Come out and help me build this company." And I was like, wow, okay, maybe this is the calling that gets me back from New York to California. And this
Which is where you grew up, in California?
I grew up in California. I grew up near Lake Tahoe
yeah.
in a small town called Placerville.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you probably
I do know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've gotten gas. Maybe stopped at our Denny's. You know?
Exactly.
There is a high school there, and people actually live there.
Well, this will play into the story, right?
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
So yeah, you came out, and was that for live ops then?
So the first company was called Keen.com or Ingenio,
okay.
and it was sell what you know, kind of eBay for services.
Huh.
And so for 2 years, I worked there with a terrific team, learning the ropes of how do you build a company, how do you build product. I had a corporate development role, ran some of the different channels, but after doing that for 2 years, I was ready to go on and get involved in my own startup as a co-founder, and that led to live ops eventually.
So explain what's the idea there, particularly as it relates to this independent worker space.
So the kind of everything out here, everything starts with technology. And when we started with live ops, actually a different company, it was called Callcast, and we had a technology that lowered the cost of connecting phone calls. And kind of with that innovation, we went into the customer service business, and eventually we ended up having home-based workers. We used our technology to leverage people working from home to deliver a new service. And the idea that we had at the time was, we're going to sell technology into existing operators, or would we start our own service? And through a lot of different maneuvers, and this is like 2002, 2000 timeframe, where there's a lot of creativity, we ended up merging our company with another company and created live ops. And the key important thing here was that we had a technology on the call routing side, but then there was this innovation in the workforce side. And when we put those two things together, we created a new model that allowed us to lower the cost of delivering the customer service product or service enough that our US home-based workers would be competitive with offshore. And that was kind of the big aha moment, to say, can we use technology and a new workforce model to do something different? Because at the time, and still today, there's a big flow of particularly service jobs moving offshore, Philippines, India. And our view was through technology and this distributed model, we'd be able to compete, and we did.
So explain, literally what is that new model? So you have people all over the country, or just describe how that works.
Right. So our basically think of it this way: it's a cloud-based customer service, right? And so anybody can log in from home and become a customer service rep with a home computer and a headset. That was kind of the basic tools of being a home-based customer service rep. In fact, today it's very common. Tons of companies leverage home-based workforce, In 2002, 2003, we were on the early end of this. And so if you're a stay-at-home mom, you work in a rural area, there's not a lot of jobs within a good driving distance from you. All you need is a high-speed internet connection, a laptop computer, and a headset, and you are accessing the global workforce. And that was really the insight of LiveOps, was that we were offering work to anybody, regardless of your background, US-based, if you had high-speed internet access, a computer, and a headset. And then you would go through a kind of our process of being qualified into the job, reading comprehension, some basic technical stuff. And then once you were in, you get qualified into a different work type, and then the machine would run and you would get served up work, whether it's AAA roadside assistance or doing pizza orders or infomercial order taking on Saturday morning. The variety was wide.
So it was literally, like you say, ran the gamut. So from kind of really low end basic stuff to pretty sophisticated upscale stuff. I mean,
right.
how would
Super simple script driven stuff, which would be just a script popping and you read the script and make the sale, to like a roadside assistance, or even we did insurance. We had licensed insurance reps who were independent contractors who were licensed for insurance, and we appointed them to our customer to our clients' system, and then they can actually sell insurance on the phone. Kind of the full variety, anything from 2 days or 3 days of training to 3 weeks of training.
So on one end, your clients are like insurance companies or AAA or whatever it is, and the back end of your system is essentially all independent contractors. Were they all independent?
So we had 20,000 agents. 100% were independent contractors.
And did you, so in that context, talk about the advantages on all sides to the independent way of doing it as opposed to
right.
a kind of full employment kind of situation.
So
from your point of view, from the client's point of view, but also from their point of view.
Yeah. So I'll start here because this is probably a very unique experience as an employer. Is that we regularly, maybe at least once a week, more than once a week, would get love letters from our workforce. We would get these emails that would say, "Thank God for LiveOps." And in my future company's Next Rep, which is also home-based customer service, this one's based in Portland, Maine. Same thing. Thank God for Next Rep. Thank God for LiveOps. And you ask, like, why are they responding like this? And the true reality is that the workforce we were tapping into didn't have that many options. So they're stay-at-home moms, so they need to work around their kids' schedule. So how can they work an 8-hour shift? So they'd be able to log in and do 2 hours in the morning, work on Wednesday, work on Thursday, not work on Friday, work on Sunday morning. Or maybe they're rural and the closest job is an hour drive. You don't get paid for driving. So, and if you're going to drive to work, are you, how long is that shift going to be? How much are you net going to make after you pay for the gas and the clothes and all these things? So what we were offering were people to have a unique access to the global workforce. And here's the very interesting thing is I've surveyed tens of thousands of independent contractor workers across many companies. And the number one reason why people want to do it, flexibility. Categorically. It's always flexibility. Money is on the list. Money is on the list, but many times money has never been number one. For my experience, and people can have other experiences, but my experiences with the home-based independent contractor worker, flexibility is always number one. And you think about why? Well, people have different lifestyles. They have different responsibilities. And being able to generate some additional income on their terms around their schedule and then be evaluated based on their performance with a lot of transparency was very empowering. We used to refer to our clients as your small business. Like you have your business, you set your schedule, you decide what programs you want to work on. But it was that flexibility that was most powerful. And then from the employer side, from our side, this is another thing I learned early on, is our relationship with the workforce was very different. Because
very different than an employee.
Well, let's say take LiveOps. So we had 500 employees, and they were mostly based in Palo Alto. And we did end up opening an office in Phoenix, which is another story that we could talk about, and who volunteered to move to Phoenix. But that workforce, your facility workforce, they're showing up every day, right? You pay somebody salary, they show up, you expect them to show up. Your distributed workforce, well, better do something nice for them. Or if they don't show up, you don't have a business. Right? So if you're offering service level to a client, you're going to answer the calls for customer service or order taking, and you didn't offer a fair deal, or you didn't deliver the promise, or you didn't pay on time, or you offered an incentive you weren't willing to pay, or you gave them crappy calls and they didn't make any money, guess who doesn't show up? So the relationship is much more in balance with the workforce. This is counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive.
Because I think a lot of times right now people think about independent contractor workers as like Uber, and you have an oversupply of people who want to drive. That's going to change in my view, by the way. We'll see. But we needed people to show up and take the calls. So one thing in like the economic is interesting too. So flexibility is number one, but people had to make at least $10 an hour or they wouldn't show up. So you have all these different incentives, 25 cents a minute, maybe they get spiffs, bonuses, all these kind of things for sales. People can maybe make $18, $20 an hour. On average, it's maybe 13 to 15. But across the board, if somebody doesn't make $10 an hour, they're not showing up next week. And you think about the person that we're attracting. They have high-speed internet, so that costs $100. They have a computer that costs $1,000. They have a certain requirement, and so we needed to deliver work that was valuable enough for their time.
And it was always above the minimum wage. I mean, any government thing, it had no.
Yeah.
It was a market, all based market.
I'm just telling you, it won't work.
It
won't work. People won't show up for long if they're showing up. And so the way it worked is it'd be flexible. They get paid per minute, typically, not paid per hour. They get paid per minute. Sometimes maybe you have an hour guarantee or something like that. Say you'll at least make $5 this hour, but that's not why people are showing up, is to make $5. What they're there is to make a reasonable amount of money at home on their terms. And so if you had a program, an offer, and we had a staffing decision, right? So we can have 1,000 people in a half-hour block and maybe serve half of them a call throughout. So maybe they're 50% utilized. They would make the equivalent of $7.50 an hour. Or we can have less staffing because we set the staffing, and the people would be busy at 75%. And that person, now they're making $12 an hour. We made the decision on how many people to staff by the number of calls that were coming in. So we had a lot of control over how much utilization was going to be that the agents were going to take. And if you just said free for all, everybody come, and everybody was making $3 an hour, nobody show up the next week. So there's a little bit of market management. Or say we didn't pay. We paid every 2 weeks if they didn't get their money every 2 weeks. Or if we offered incentives and we said, if you work 20 hours this week, you're going to get some kind of bonus, and we didn't pay it, people won't show up. And I think that's really important, is that the power dynamic isn't only one way in this work. It's not always only that way.
So when you mentioned, okay, number one, flexibility. Say more about what people saw as the advantages of it, beyond flexibility and I guess this empower balance.
This is super important, because also a lot of people don't understand what the value of a dollar is to a person who works from home. Okay, so on average, across these different companies and different programs, say on average somebody's making $13 an hour. That's about right. If I think about across a bunch of different programs, so he's making like $13 an hour as an independent contractor. So that's not really $13, because if this person was going to go work at Walmart, for example, they would drive for an hour each way. So it would work an 8-hour shift. They would work 10. They don't get paid, so that's 20%. Gas. Typically, they're going to make a commute to work that might be 15 miles, maybe 20 miles. That's 2 gallons of gas per day to go to work. See where I'm going with this? Now they have childcare that now maybe they have to pay for, maybe they don't. Maybe it takes their time. They have to share time with somebody. They have to eat outside of the office. So now instead of eating at home, they're having to pay a couple bucks for lunch. So if you start adding this up, that $13 looks a lot richer than $13, because if they were going to go and take a job and make $13 W-2 income, they don't get paid for the 2 hours. So that's 16% that they lost. They didn't get paid for. The gas, that's 2 gallons, $3 a gallon. That's $6. That's almost $1 an hour. Right? So you start adding those things up, and then there's the opportunity cost of what shift can they work. And so I think that intuitively, the contractor worker sees the $13 as much more than $13. And the other thing is if that job is available. Because many times, if you're working in rural or kind of quasi-rural places, the nearest job isn't paying $13. Walmart job is less than 10. The retail job at the gas station, like the alternatives are actually a lot less than that, and you still have all that overhead. So I think, and here's the really important thing that I'll put on the table in terms of do the workers like this? The vast majority of our workforce were referral, and we would get 2,000 people apply a week.
Really?
Massive uptake. People really wanted to do the job because the flexibility, the money, and the access, frankly.
Now, when you say the money, given that they're contractors, though they had to take on their own tax and Social Security and stuff like that, but I guess the comparison is a lot of these people in Walmart are also contracted, right? Or are they employees? I'm just wondering, how does it stack with employee kind of benefits at that level?
So I'm not sure of how Walmart pays people. Actually, I assume that it's either part-time W-2 would be my guess.
I don't know.
And in that case, if, say they're $10 an hour, they'd be netting out all the the FICA, the payroll taxes, all the stuff. So the net to the person who drives an hour and gets that job, the net to them would be much less than $10. And it's a bit controversial because with the contractor model, we're paying them a gross amount and they're responsible for their taxes. And that would also mean paying their FICA taxes. Right. So that is a trade-off. Right. At the same time, when you're an independent contractor, you now can write off your home internet. You can write off your computer. You get to participate in the tax advantages of being a small business. That if you're a W-2 worker, you wouldn't get those advantages. So I mean, all right. So there is a trade-off. And there's no denying the fact that there's a trade-off. If you have W-2 income, you're going to get a payroll deduction from your paycheck, and the company is going to take care of sending money to pulling the taxes out, which would include the employer match, right? The 15%, the employer match of 7.5%. So the real net here is the employer match piece, frankly. And that's the piece if you, as an independent contractor, you're responsible for your own taxes. So you would have to cover the employer match piece. So there is a dollar trade-off. And then the question is, does the contractor work pay enough? More than the W-2? Because here's the thing. It ain't free, right? So when somebody's paying $10 an hour, the cost to the employer is more than 10. The cost to their employer is probably closer to 14, right? Because all the overhead that they got to pay, and then you net out the overhead of the payroll taxes. Now there's benefits. You get Social Security, you get the unemployment, you get there's a lot of benefits. There's no doubt to it, right? The net dollar comes out to whatever 7. In the contractor world, the contractor is responsible for their taxes. And the one big thing they don't get is the employer match on FICA, which is like 7.5%. That's just a trade-off. You say, does the contractor work pay enough to overcome that? Then you get the other benefits. Some people get healthcare. If you're a part-time worker, you probably don't get healthcare. You wouldn't get healthcare on an independent contractor. What we found in our surveying is typically the worker, somebody in the family, had healthcare. Frankly, I think this is a great case for universal healthcare. I think that the kind of the innovation economy, those who are willing to go take risk and do different things, and we spread the work around the country. If we did have like a single payer universal healthcare and the employer wasn't responsible for the healthcare, and by the way, not free, right? So when healthcare costs go up, wages don't go up because the cost of pay of work, the actual cost of the line of the labor cost is getting pulled into the healthcare costs.
Totally.
So I think that's the big trade-off. The difficult thing is a lot of people are not used to managing it themselves, and so there's a learning curve to say they have to file these taxes and stuff like that. But I have a lot more faith in people, I guess, to say that they can do this themselves, and everybody has their own trade-offs. They may have another way to get healthcare. They may have another way They may have write-offs that they want to put up against their income that they wouldn't be able to do if they had W-2. So who knows?
So we're describing the past and the current situation, and it still seems, by and large, with all these people you're talking about, it's advantageous. They want to do it. Probably have some caveats, but we're talking about the future of work here and the future of independent workers. So would you say understanding what they like and don't like, and understanding from the employer's point of view what's positive and negative, talk about some of the things that if you were innovating on the future of work, both from the point of view of a company or policy for that matter, what are the pieces? You mentioned one, for example, universal health care that would just take that load and distribute it differently. There's a good one. But are there other thoughts that you just top of mind, what you'd be thinking about that would really improve the situation, and actually not just for the individual worker, although that's the key thing, but for the system to work better, for everything to kind of move, to, innovation to happen, people take more risks, to kind of really get an economy that's happening in that space. Well, any thoughts on that?
So I'll tackle this in two layers. One with the independent contractor, and then one with the workforce in general.
Okay.
So on the contractor side, I think what we need now is more clarity.
That's an interesting way to think of it. Say more about that.
So take, for example, my company in Portland, Maine, which is called NextRep, and it's a great company. It's kind of like LiveOps 2.0. It's home-based customer service, a little bit more on the high end, doing longer like Grubhub would be an example of a client for them. These are, Drybar, like these companies that maybe want a different experience with their customer service, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for it. And the U.S. home-based workers provide a higher quality of service. But this company is my first foray into a company based outside of Silicon Valley. So this was based in Portland, Maine. I had this idea of a LiveOps 2.0 kind of thing. Said we don't have to build the technology, we can buy the technology. I found a terrific partner who his only request was that he can move to Portland, Maine, and I said, terrific. And so we set the company up there and grew it over the course of 5 years to about 800 people. And
800
agents.
Agents, okay,
Yeah.
who are independent contractors.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a bit more regional, so the majority of the agents were in a smaller number of states. LiveOps was very broad. We probably were in 22 different states. The NextRep model was a little bit more narrow, mostly in Maine, and then also Georgia and Florida and a few other places. And so the question though was, now we're investing in our model. It's like, how big can we make this company without taking the risk now that we're going to get sued for a breach of independent contractor?
Meaning, say more about that.
So typically, if if you're taking an independent contractor approach to your workforce model, you have the federal rules are very clear. There's like 20 things you have to do. If you do those 20 things, you're generally on the pretty good side of independent contractor. And then each state have their own rules.
I see.
And like California has a different set of rules, Oregon has a different set of rules, Georgia, Maine has a different set of rules. Oh, Maine actually is pretty clear. They say that they follow the federal rules. Probably 15 or 20 of the states say just to follow the federal rules, and then other states have their own rules. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to try to opine too much on that. But there's this really critical issue is when you're trying to build a business, you need some certainty of your workforce model. And to say, is our model complying with the rules so we can then continue to reinvest it and create jobs? And I think that one of the big limitations or one of the risks to building big businesses around contractor model is the risk. I mean, look at the lawsuits that Uber is having. Look at the lawsuits that anybody who has an independent contractor model, they're fighting these lawsuits, and that is stifling company formation because you have to have billions of dollars to take the risk of fighting it. Now, I believe that entrepreneurship should be happening everywhere. And companies that are started in Portland, Maine or Baltimore, they're not going to have access to Uber money. Mm-hmm. They're not going to have the budget, the legal budget. So maybe they're getting stifled in starting new companies that might leverage independent contractor model because they're afraid of getting sued. And they're not going to have the budget and stuff like that, so they're not going to be able to attract a lot of capital. We had a different approach in NextRep, is we actually went to the state of Maine and asked them to audit us. We said, come and audit our approach. And they came in, they ran a review, and they gave us a clean bill of health and said, you're following all the independent contractor rules, which we diligently did, by the way. And so then we felt comfortable investing and continuing to build the business in Maine. So that's actually a place where states, I think that might be one of the questions at some points, how states can attract this kind of work. I think there's a differentiator that states can do is by clarifying their rules and then basically offering these safe harbor options to companies. And my view was, if we ever had trouble with the company in next year, because we are in multiple states, we just move everybody to Maine, because Maine and New Hampshire gave us very clear direction that our model worked. So that certainty, I think, then will unlock more investment, which then will increase the number of people working in the space. Now, one more thing I want to say on the contractor model, which is a big limiter, which I would like to see innovation on, is there's one big rule in the 20 points of contractor policy, is that you can't train people.
Yeah, that's a weird one. Let's talk about that, because that's an interesting one.
So one of the, because it's kind of built on some kind of model. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but this idea that you bring your own tools, you bring your own skills, and that's what a contractor is. Like a plumber, you wouldn't train a plumber. I understand the metaphor, right? I wouldn't train my plumber on how to do plumbing. I hire him, he comes in, he's a contractor. Mm-hmm. And so since the value to both the worker and the company is so high in, like for certain types of work, we all want to have the contractor model. So we're very careful not to run awry of those rules. So if you have this workforce of contractors and now you want to offer them a new skill, you can't do it.
Which is in the benefit of both people, including...
Yeah, because exactly. So we, in this case, we were willing to invest in IT skills. How do you better work your computer so you can put virus scans, so you can use new software packages, so you can get Salesforce training, all these kind of things. Like, there's a ton of things that we would be willing to invest in the workforce, but then we were now training people. So what we have to do is say, hey, go over there, go get that certificate, bring the certificate back, and then we'll certify you into the work. And
would you reimburse them somehow, or you can't do that?
So it's tricky. So
this is you dancing around the current laws. What you're saying is we should straighten this out, basically.
We should straighten it out and unleash the power of companies that want to train their workforce and get the advantages of flexibility. I think there's two roads here. We could either think that independent contractor work is valuable and that it's good for people and it's good for companies, good for the economy, it's good for the workers, and recognize that there are certain things that we need to do to make sure that it's not abusive and that it's high quality and there's things like that. Those are the things I think we need to do. Or we say, let's take the industrial model of a shop floor with rigid rules and all this overhead and inflexibility and all this stuff, and then we try to squeeze the service economy of distributed digital workers into this model that makes no sense. So
it's clear where you
I fall very clearly in this, because I'm not trying to serve this industrial model of workforce.
Right.
Makes no sense. It doesn't make sense for the current shop floor, by the way, frankly. And so I say that let's err on the side of more flexibility. Flexibility is the number one thing. Let me say one point on this. Spending more money on the workers wasn't the reason why we weren't trying to necessarily save cost in the contractor model. No. We're trying to maximize utilization. The flexibility was the most important thing. Let me go back to
your point of view.
From our business side of
as well as their point of view.
So how do we compete against the Philippines with U.S. workers? Mm-hmm. We're more productive. That's how we win. We're not going to win. We pay people $13 an hour. What do they make in the Philippines? $2.25? $1.75? So you tell me the delta. How are we as U.S. companies supposed to employ service workers in the U.S., work that could go to the Philippines, if we have to use the same work model that we use historically that lost those jobs to the Philippines? There's 1.2 million workers in the Philippines, and I love the Philippines. The Philippines is terrific. This is not about the Philippines. This is just about the reality that the digital world has pros and cons. And one of the pros for the Philippines is that this service work has, by and large, moved, the low end has moved to the Philippines.
Right.
80% of that work is servicing the US.
Yeah.
Right? So that's almost
Right.
a million jobs.
Yeah.
And for us to compete against that low wage, we're not going to put barriers up. That's not going to work. We need to use technology to increase productivity. One of the key things that we did to increase productivity is in a staffing model, you staff, so when the calls start coming in or the emails or whatever the work, when it's coming in, you make a decision on what your service level is going to be.
Yep.
And if you're in a facility, you're paying people in 8-hour shifts, you're going to have bad service level at the peaks, and you're going to have underutilization at the bottom, and you're going to have an average cost. With distributed workforce, we were able to actually staff on 30-minute basis, 30 minutes, all the way up the curve, and we would get utilizations that were in like the high 90s%. And
90% of the time that person would be
92% of the time they were in a 93% of the time they were in a productive state, like a build state.
which is kind of good for them too. They're doing something.
We paid them for the productive state.
Yeah.
So they wanted as much productive state as possible.
I see. So,
So
the
we
8%
aligned
that
interest.
they didn't, you weren't paying them anyhow.
We weren't paying them anyhow.
So they want to be. Okay.
Well, it depends because sometimes they were in after work stuff. Like they're that's why I say like 8%.
Yeah.
There was 8% of the time where they were doing things that they would get paid for on the thing
Yeah.
that we wouldn't bill.
Okay.
Right? That just happens.
Yeah.
But that's pretty small.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is that technology actually allowed us to employ people at 6x the cost. So we need to do more of that if we're going to compete globally in the services business. We're going to need to use technology to increase productivity because not every job is a fast food worker.
Yeah.
Right, where it's linked to the location.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so when you get outside of that, we need to use technology to increase the productivity of the workforce. And then the key is that all that productivity doesn't just go to capital. That productivity gain actually needs, this is another question we need to dig around in. I think the contractor model is different from the distribution of return to productivity between labor and capital. That's a different, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
That's a different conversation. I mean,
yeah, it is a different conversation. But we should maybe go there. But what you're saying, well, say more about that actually, as long as you brought it up here. You're talking about the distribution of who gets paid what at the end.
So,
basically.
right. So I think
it's different than what you're.
Yeah, because I think one of the big criticisms of the on-demand or the contractor model is that Tim Riley has the platform versus the worker argument.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the platform is getting highly benefited, and we got to make sure the worker is getting their share of this. And I agree with that. I think that question is independent of the category that we put workers in,
Yeah.
whether they're a contractor or a W-2 worker or 1099 or W-2. That's independent. That's a different question than allocation of the productivity that we're getting from the technology.
Yeah. So let's just lay that out just to be clear that anyone's watching. So basically what you're saying is technology allows that service job to go through telecom to the Philippines. Mm-hmm. It also allows a US-based worker to get 92% kind of productivity time.
From home in rural Georgia.
From home in rural Georgia or rural Maine or whatever it is. As long as you change the context to allow that person to function as an independent contractor, better if you get some training and some other things we could change about that. So there's the level of like, how does it work? So there's a little bit of innovation that has to happen to keep that productivity high. Mm-hmm. The second level of innovation you're thinking about is rebalancing the distribution from who gains a lion's share of the profit essentially out of that.
Yeah. How do we allocate the productivity gain from the technology?
That's what you're saying, right?
That's a separate question, and I think they get blurred where the allocate, because obviously there's an income inequality issue that we're facing in our country, and technology is driving a lot of that, and technology people are benefiting from a lot of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, look where all the profits are going from the technology industry. It's very clear that it's going to capital and it's going to the companies that are building the platforms. Mm-hmm. So that is a separate question from one of workforce categorization. I want them to be separate because income inequality isn't driven by a person being categorized as an independent contractor mm-hmm. or a W-2 worker. Mm-hmm. That is not true.
Got you.
And it doesn't mean that it's not true that income inequality is a problem. It is. Let's address that separately from whether somebody is a contractor or an employee.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Totally get it.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that platform inequality thing?
So I think I have a big idea here that I want to throw on the table. And let's play around with it for a second, because I really think a lot about this. To say, like, if you want less of something, what do? You tax it. Right? So if you want people to smoke less, you have $10 pack of cigarettes. It actually turns out people smoke less with $10 cigarettes. But let's look at like how we burden and subsidize the different components of our system. Labor tends to get the most burden. We put the payroll tax, we put the unemployment tax, we put the Medicare tax, we put all the taxes on top of it. Then we put all the work rules on it, overtime, inflexibility. We put all this stuff on top of it. And these are all good things. I'm not arguing against the value of these things. But then we also put the highest tax rate, right? Labor is taxed at the highest, 39% on the top margin, right? So now you have all this cost and overhead. And then on the other side, capital. We subsidize capital, right? We have super low interest rates. We have super low tax rates, so it's 20% plus the 2.8 or 3.8, so it's like 23.8. And it's very flexible. There's very little burden on capital. When I look at this, I say, we've created a system that has basically put a big bullseye on labor by making it inflexible, expensive, all this stuff. And then we have subsidized the thing that is now doing the natural thing, replacing it. Doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So we actually have created this system, and I don't think somebody designed it this way, but we've created a system that makes labor a very natural target to be replaced by capital. And then we goose the capital return to replace the labor by making the cost of capital and the return on capital high. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of a weird thing that I think if we, going into the future, want to think about how do we get a better allocation between capital and labor, we probably need to think about the burdens and costs and overhead and the subsidies. Is there another way to get the outcomes that we want to get for, social stability? Like when people retire, we're going to need funds to pay for people to retire. Right now, we put all that labor on the people who work. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. And the benefit of that goes to everybody. Literally, because if we don't have the money in the thing, we're going to pay for it in deficit spending anyway. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not like we're not going to pay for Social Security 30 years from now by just doing a general tax. Mm-hmm. So when I look at this, I just want to put that on the table to think about. It's like we have made a set of policies that makes labor inflexible, expensive, and easy, and have a high incentive to replace. And then we've actually supercharged the thing that replaces it. It's just something to think about.
One question on that before we shift a little bit into some politics here, which I think the implications of this. To what extent, because you're not, a guy from a little town in California, rural, red part of the state.
Still, yeah. It's red California.
Fair enough.
There is a district.
But you've, created all these companies, you're doing, you've done well by yourself. But you're a tech guy. So to what extent do you think the tech community who are building these platforms are open to, your peers are open to saying, yeah, let's raise the tax on capital. Let's shift the burden now from labor to, we're fine with it. We'll take an extra hit. We'll be more magnanimous in terms of what we're willing to throw into the pot. I mean, I'm just curious where you think that rebalancing attitude is, or you think you're odd in that way, or how do you think about that?
I'll be honest with you, because when I look at that shifted calculation, it will cost me.
Yeah.
And the reason why it doesn't happen is because the people who are making the decision are the ones who it costs. So it's very clear why it doesn't happen. Because to make that, the people who are benefiting from this are not going to make the decision to burden themselves. So the question you're asking is, would the technology industry be open to it? I don't think we're talking about it. I don't think that we're actually talking about this the right way. We're actually having this, we have this natural thing, always lower capital gains tax, low subsidized cost of capital. That kind of seems to be just a given. Like it's something we just take for granted. That's just the way the world's supposed to be. We actually haven't looked and saw like, what are we doing about labor? Why do we have this labor model that is kind of a legacy of the industrial era? And currently the response has been to get rid of labor. Now, I think that people would be open to it if it's put in this context. The current
People meaning
the
tech
industry,
platform people,
the leaders.
yeah.
I mean, I don't speak for people. I speak for myself on this. If somebody presented this idea to me and says, "Look, if our goal is that the robots and the AI is coming, and they're going to significantly lower the need for a lot of current jobs," you say, "But we have a social goal of maintaining employment," because I think a lot of my peers would agree that work is more valuable than the dollars you earn from it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if anybody disagrees with that, they're not really being honest. The other thing is that I don't know anybody.
Meaning this satisfaction, this
You're
sense of
producing
purpose,
something like there's purpose in it. Like, the idea of getting paid money to sit at home versus going and working and doing something and producing something. If it was the same dollar amount, the satisfaction level, I'm confident, would be to actually produce and make something. Now, there are crappy jobs that you don't like, that you don't want to do. I'm not saying like that's the ultimate positive end state. Like, my mom was a mailman, 34 years as a postal carrier, as a mail carrier. That's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you that she is a happier person in retirement knowing that she worked every day 8 to 5 to produce stuff for our family, that she is now been enjoying the benefits of that retirement. That's a fact. So actually, that's my personal values. Do I think that people who come to Silicon Valley and work their tails off to build things would agree with that? Yes. Then would you naturally say that should we create a system that allows us to bring more labor, more employment into the world? And if we need to do that by balancing the distribution of the burdens of society by having a higher capital tax to offset a lower labor tax, I think that would be a fair conversation.
Mm-hmm.
If we can actually show that we can have more labor in the system by unburdening it, but making it more flexible. Like, I think if you just said it's going to be the same inflexible, rigid system that we have today, but we're going to have a higher cost of capital, that sounds like a bad deal.
Mm-hmm.
What if we said we're going to have lower burdens, more flexibility, more ways to put the human capital, called like the AI-enabled human being, which is really going to be the future of work. If we want to get to the future of work, the future of work to me is that call center job that I helped create, that use technology to increase productivity, so an American worker can make 6 times the Philippines worker, and we still created enough value for our clients to justify the labor. We're going to do more of that here. Robot-enabled people, AI-enabled people. But to do that, if we lower the cost of each labor input, well, then we can have more labor in the workforce. And I think if we can show that, then people would be willing to do that.
I actually personally agree with that. I've been here for over 20 years, and my gut feeling is that decision is
it's a great trade-off, right?
I think there's a, again, it's not really articulated well, and we're not really having that conversation robustly, but my gut feeling is that would end well if we did have that conversation, or it could end well. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. Well, let's shift just as we're because we don't have a ton of time here. It's a fascinating kind of piece, but I want to move a little bit into the broader politics, since you've kind of raised politics out.
Okay.
And I want to just bring up this idea of the geographic distribution piece. I know this is something you've thought about, and I've talked to you about. So we just talked about a big political decision of kind of the cost of capital and flexibility of workers. So there's clear policy implications here. But talk about it. We're in this situation here, red, blue America. I mean, Jesus, this summer here of 2017 is just getting worse and worse. The polarization, it's just, are we even going to be able to live together? I mean, it's just getting to be a really, just a lot of people are distraught about this. Mm-hmm. So your feeling, and my understanding is that you see this kind of potential of redistributing the economic benefits through this kind of decentralized independent worker phenom at some level. So talk a little bit about how that vision kind of plays out and why that's such an important thing.
Sure. This is such an important topic. I mean, to me, this is the topic of our times. Since November, I think a lot of people have woken up to why this is such a hugely important problem. A lot of people talk about the vertical income inequality, right? Top half of 1% has like 40% of the wealth of the country or something like that. So there's this vertical axis, but there's the horizontal axis, and this is not talked about. Not, well, maybe it's being talked about now, but the horizontal axis, I think, is the one that's really driving our political divide and our culture divide. And I think it's the economic divide is actually at the core of this. The number that is most telling to me is in the election, Hillary Clinton won 64% of national income in 500 counties.
Wait, explain that a little bit more.
So Hillary Clinton won 500 counties, right? The blue counties is 500 counties. Within those 500 counties, it was 64% of national income. That means that the 2,700 counties that make up the rest of the country are divvying up 1/3 of the national income of the country. So just like let that settle in for a second, and then we actually see the horizontal divide between the country. And the economic anxiety of the people who voted for change in 2008 for President Obama hung in there in 2012 and then collapsed in 2016. This is the problem. We live in the blue bubble where everything is going amazing. Like you walk around San Francisco, you go to New York, and it's booming. It's changing all the time. There's positives. Housing prices are up. I mean, our problem is cost of housing. That's really and access to workers and stuff like that. But the reality across the country is this prosperity that we're enjoying here is not being shared broadly across the country. And so this is, I think, the most important initiative of our time, is how do we get a modern technology or digital-driven economy to work across the country, and not just in a small region of the country in a small number of hands, because it's just not going to work. And so, I think there's two models to it. We're either going to have a very leftist view that says tax it up to the top of the government, and then there will be a redistribution. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, more through a pro-business or an economic-driven way, is to say that we need to restructure our economy so the benefits of the gains generated through the modern economy more broadly distribute. And my specific proposal for this is that companies like in Silicon Valley, like Salesforce and Zendesk and Google and Facebook, all these companies, that instead of moving all the workers from the middle of the country and drain them out to increase the cost of living in San Francisco and the Bay Area, we actually open offices in places like Columbus and Youngstown and Ann Arbor, and we move some of that prosperity out to those communities. So they're like islands that then can start building the innovation economy in those communities, which then can lead to the entrepreneurism, can get some capital formation in new companies that then I think will kind of lead to people feeling more positive about the future. We have to address this geographic income inequality, or the country's going to continue to pull apart.
I love this idea, but let's go a little bit, because your expertise, we talked about your expertise of understanding a contract-based independent worker distribution. But there's a side of that you're implying here, that essentially a company like Google, Facebook, Zendesk could productively interact with those people in Columbus, Ohio, or whatever, as well as, you'd say, as if they're coming into work every day or living right in Mountain View, or talk about is technology at a place now that distributed work is as those workers are as productive as they would be in any kind of physical setting. I'd love, again, given your experience.
So I think let me just like call out our own industry on this one a little bit, okay? Because we talk a big talk about disruption and how everybody's got to change and learn to live with the future. And what did Apple just do? They opened up a massive building with open style desks, and they're moving everybody into these big rooms, and so they can sit next to each other. That is the oldest idea I've ever heard. Right? That is not fresh thinking. That's not innovative thinking. Right? That is like an industrial model for producing hardware and software products. So I challenge ourselves to think, we should be answering this question. Why is it that the technology is actually, we're like consolidating geographically in a digital world all the means of production? That makes no sense. So we're the ones who should be solving this problem, right? We're the ones who say, that doesn't make any sense. I'll give you a very specific example. And I'll name check a really great company, Zendesk, which is a San Francisco company. They have about 1,700, maybe call 2,000 global employees, 800 of them downtown San Francisco.
Can you explain to people who don't know that, what do they do?
So Zendesk is a CRM software. So it's customer service software, mostly focused on small and mid-sized businesses. And so when you call customer service, the customer service rep might be one of our home agents, would open up the thing and be managing handling your service record, your customer service request through the Zendesk software. Great company, $3 billion public company. They have a problem. They're based in downtown San Francisco, and they're competing against all the unicorns and hot companies in San Francisco, right, for talent. And there's this great story of they were recruiting from Madison, University of Madison, or University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they realized they were moving people out here and then paying them 30-40% more to have a lower quality of life than if they actually just left them in Madison. And so as a result of this, they have grown their office in Madison to 250, and they've recently, I don't talk out of turn, but recently decided to grow their workforce there because they have lower cost, lower turnover, at least as good quality, and frankly, it just works culturally for the company. They're getting the best people at a lower price. And so they have figured out how to do it. So it's possible. And it's a strategic advantage for them. As a public company, they need to be mindful of cost. And one small thing I want to put on the table again to challenge our progressive Silicon Valley ethos. We can take a graduate from a university in the Midwest, and there's tons of them, right? They come here every year. We bring tons of people from Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and we can pay them, call it $100,000. Sounds like a lot of money. In San Francisco, $100,000, you've got 2 roommates, you don't save any money. It's pretty much like, and this is, I hate even saying it, it's kind of a lower middle class job with no promise of buying a house or anything like that. Or we could take that same graduate, we can open an office for $6 a square foot rather than $70 a square foot. We can use technology to network that office, and we can have them move there and pay them $65,000 as a new grad, doing the same job from that location. They will likely own their own home within 5 years. They'll be able to save money, send their kids to good public schools. Now we've created an upper middle class job. So we can either continue to create lower middle class jobs and pay 30-40% more for it, or we can challenge ourselves to actually create high quality jobs that broaden the prosperity across the country and create a sustainable economy. That is the future of work.
You really think that infrastructure, video conferencing, high-speed internet, mobile everything, is as good as being there? Or do you give some credence to the idea of just, you've been able to come in the office here and us go to lunch and we grab drinks? Or, is there a social piece of the kind of the physicality that you wouldn't discount? Or would you really think it's pretty much a straight up? So
my joke answer is, as soon as you have 2 floors, you've got two distinct regions, right? It's true. When everybody's on floor 1, everybody works together. As soon as you have a second floor, it's like, I have to go upstairs. Can we just, literally, we'll do a video chat if you're upstairs and I'm downstairs. It's reality. But we can still have our weekly meetings together. But here's what I think about this, is we have been really good in process automation business, which is a lot of enterprise software is focused on process automation, right? Where we've broken the work into different components, right? I think that there's a massive opportunity for mid-tech jobs. I call it mid-tech for the middle class in the Midwest.
When you say mid-tech, what do you mean by mid-tech?
Mid-tech, okay, so let me give you an example of Salesforce, which is an amazing company. The leadership that Mark Benioff shows us all on how to be good citizens is actually incredible, right? They have 27,000 employees, something like maybe 30,000 employees. Last I checked, they have about 4,000 engineers, 4,000 or 5,000 engineers. What does everybody else do? They assemble the software product. They're sales, they're integrators, they build dashboards, they do QA, they do customer service. Those are mid-tech jobs. A mid-tech job is not a developer. A developer, maybe put all your high-end developers in San Francisco or Mountain View or wherever you need them. But what about your your integrators, your implementers, your inside sales. There's a bunch of jobs where you need to be able to use the software. That's why it's tech. So you have to use the software. It's like back to Salesforce. They have a thing I think called Trailwind, which they're training, like they want to train 2 million people on how to use the Salesforce tools so they can go and work at different companies. Like that's a mid-tech job. That job does not have to be in downtown San Francisco. The collaboration isn't as important, and in fact, the collaboration maybe should be happening in Columbus.
Where you can sell and do connect
Right.
with
So
other
put your team there, and then the in-person meetings can be happening there. There's no case that I can see where your mid-tech operations have to be sitting next to your strategic or core engineering assets. There's a preference. There's a preference, probably because you want the senior leader who's in charge of that mid-tech resource to be able to walk in and do the meetings, and I get that. But in terms of the actual workers doing their work remotely, I know they can do it from home. So if they can do it from home, they could do it in a remote office. It's just a cultural shift. And I think that the benefits to the company for lower cost, the benefits to the company higher quality through less attrition, and frankly, the benefits to the country. You know, on this point, I'll say something I think it might sound a little controversial, to say, as a tech industry, and I don't represent the industry, but I'm in it, they say either we are part of the solution or we're going to get blamed for the problem. We're making that decision now. So I don't think we have a choice. So we either start engaging, and this isn't like, another thing I want to say on this is not a charity.
Yeah.
The reality is we have incredibly skilled people. My investment thesis, and half of my investments are outside of Silicon Valley, is there's talent everywhere. Period. I know it to be true. There's technology that is enabling entrepreneurism, to tackling different problems that I don't even know from here that should be happening more in places like Miami and Atlanta and Youngstown. That's a fact, right? So I believe in that future, and so we need to step up to that challenge, and kind of through the leadership of opening these offices and kind of create the coral reefs that can actually build these ecosystems of entrepreneurship and independent contractor workers, but spread it out across the country. I think this is our big opportunity.
So that vision is a really compelling vision. But is there any policy ways, or how do we initiate that kind of vision? How do we move the country in that direction? Any final thoughts on how does it start to happen? Because it's a very compelling point of view.
So this is the way I think about it, and I'll share this analogy. So when I went to Youngstown in February and met a lot of just amazing people and realized there's entrepreneurism, there's energy everywhere, but this place was very disconnected. Right? This is kind of where I'll start on this. And I was looking around and like, why does this place exist? Like, how did Youngstown become Youngstown? Like, how did these steel mills and this auto factory and this university, why is this all here? And I started thinking about it. And I said, well, okay, when we started this country, the first place we went was west. Right after the revolution, we went to Ohio Valley. We had our bread basket of the first bread basket in the country. And what we built roads, and we grew the food in Ohio, and we sent it to the cities. And then the cities, they needed energy. So what do? We went out into Appalachia, and we dug out the coal, and we started poking holes in western Pennsylvania, and we sent the energy to the cities. And then when it was time to build the cities tall, we didn't make the steel in Brooklyn. We made the steel in Indiana and Ohio. And where did we send it? We put it on rails, and we sent it to the city, and we built the cities tall. And you see, the demand signal has always been in our urban areas, and our supply has been kind of in this industrial Midwest. Then we get to the machine age, cars. Like assembling cars in Michigan, we didn't assemble the cars in Philadelphia. We assembled the cars and make the cars but then we sold them in Philadelphia. And then we kind of cruise along to the 70s, and then we have hyperinflation, globalization, all these things, and the demand signal breaks. And for 25 years, they've been hoping for it to come back, and it's not coming back. And in the meantime, we've moved to this digital economy, right? So now we kind of wake up, and we have...
Which, by the way, is now way over on the West Coast.
On the West Coast. The demand signal of what to build, that when I was in Youngstown in February, I saw these really terrific, hardworking people, but they didn't know what to build. They didn't know what the skills they needed. They didn't know how to sell a service to somebody in Silicon Valley. They're disconnected. So we need to reconnect. And so this story of the demand signal being in our urban areas and our supply being in a historic kind of industrial Midwest is the story of America. That's why the universities are there. That's why the roads are there. That's why the things that the cultural legacies of these places, so we can reconnect those assets. And so I have 3 key points that I'll kind of put on the table. One is the demand discovery. These places, call it Ohio or wherever, I believe they should open offices in Silicon Valley, development offices. Right? Much like every country around the world has a development office in the United States, my favorite is the Irish Development Agency. They have 25 full-time people banging around Silicon Valley, knocking on doors, buying drinks, telling you about the benefits of Ireland. And when you say yes to the IDA, they'll send the packing crew, they'll host you in Ireland, they'll help you pick a location, do a recruiting fair. They're amazing. They're amazing. They're really good at it. And why? But people wouldn't know about Ireland if they weren't being told about it. So number one, we need to have a development office. We need Ohio and Michigan and these places to come here and do demand signal. They need to actually find the demand and educate the market. That's number one. Number two is we need to make it easier to discover these assets. So if you are here and you want to grow your company, like a lot of times you're going to Salt Lake City, you're going to Phoenix, you're going to known places. The growth playbook has like 6-7 places, Austin, Boulder, something like that. We need to put the Midwest in the playbook, put it on the menu. And to do that, I think we can build a very easy discovery tool, call it like a kayak for the resources that shows skills, cost, all these kind of things. Make it super easy. So if you're looking to grow your company, you can look and say, what would it cost if I'd open my office in Dayton, Ohio? What would that look like? Right? It should be really, really easy. Data exists. And number 3 is the work that you're doing, is actually the leadership. We need, as an industry, to step up and say, this is important. The country's divided, the economy's not working broadly enough, and we need businesses to lead by example. What Salesforce is doing in Indiana, when they bought ExactTarget, they're growing that from 1,500 to over 2,000, that's terrific. What Zendesk is doing in Madison, with their 250 and growing from there, it's terrific. There's a bunch of companies that are doing it at smaller examples, but I think we can do a lot more. In building that example, I say, we follow the leadership in this industry. Right? We follow when Salesforce or Google or Facebook are opening offices and showing what's possible. If they're all doing it in New York City, well, everybody's going to go to New York City. If they're finding and solving the problems and saying the way a world-class company grows their business now is not staying in Silicon Valley, but is actually opening offices across the country and leveraging and tapping into that talent, then I think we'll have more of it. So that's kind of the 3-point plan for reconnecting the economy.
And when you mentioned Youngstown, I think, if I recall, you were there with Representative Tim Ryan,
That's right.
Which is from there. Mm-hmm. So do you think there's a recognition in our political circles of the potential for this kind of rethink at some level?
So I think that the economy is definitely moving up the priority list. And I say that it's not there yet, sadly. I think there's a lot of distraction for good reasons. I mean, things are rough out there right now. But in the end, we're going to have, both sides are going to have a positive vision for the economic future for this country. The team that comes up with the best economic vision for the country is going to win the day in the long run. That's my view. And Congressman Ryan is not alone in this. Ro Khanna, who is our local Silicon Valley representative, at least for the South Bay, which includes Apple and Google, is also a big leader in this. He's talking about the responsibility of the tech industry to create jobs and prosperity across the country. So I think the answer is yes. I think a lot of the younger leadership are seeing this potential and seeing this threat, but I don't think it's gone high enough yet. I think I don't want to get too political, but things like a national minimum wage is not a middle class economic policy. I mean, I grew up middle class. Minimum wage is not middle class. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just not. And so if you're telling my middle class family that we're going to increase the middle wage, solve the problem, that is not solving the problem. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just not a middle class economic policy, right. Frankly. And then there's like I said before, is that Silicon Valley is so good at creating wealth. So good at creating wealth. If we go and show other people how to create wealth, they're going to follow us on big issues like climate change.
Right.
So if we go out, so we care about climate change a lot around here. I care about it, you care about it, we care about it a lot. If we show up in the rest of the country and we show people that we care about their family's economics, we care about your son and daughter's future economically. And that doesn't mean move out of town. That means that we've got a plan to help you create an economic future in your town. Once people believe that, I really think that they'll follow us on other issues. Now climate change doesn't become a threat. It becomes an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that the Democrats have won the trust of the people that they need to rely on to get the policies that they want. The last thing I'll say on that is that Representative Ryan is a great example of what's possible as a Democrat. He won 67% re-election in a district that went 50.4 for Hillary Clinton. And what's the 17-point difference? I mean, Tim writes a book on meditation. He writes a book on healthy food. He's not afraid to stand up for the human causes of climate change. And he's certainly not afraid to send emails around that says that the Ohio legislature is attacking a woman's right to choose. The guy's pretty progressive.
Mm-hmm.
So how did he win 17 more points in over the national, I'll just say Hillary example of national Democrat in Ohio. And he'll say, and I'll speak for him on this, he says, I show up and people believe that I have their back. And once you have people's back financially, economically, and in their family, they'll follow you anywhere. So you got to start there. And I think that we in the Valley, we in the growth economy have the most potential of any industry in the country to actually go and actually move the dial for people economically. And the last thing I'll say on this is showing up is half the battle. After being in Youngstown, I'd organized 13 people. We all went out on short notice in February. I'm still connected to people I met on that trip. They're so grateful that people showed up and cared and listened. And they also got to see the pace of our play. They got to see the pace of our play. And I've heard anecdotally from people back there that it changed the way that people are thinking about their own companies, their own new ideas, and how they're thinking bigger. And just caring, this matters. So let's start with that.
So while we got to stop right there, unfortunately we go on for another hour or so here, but great ideas on the independent worker, on the system of evolution, future tech. Couldn't have had a better conversation, really appreciate it. And so there is another piece of the puzzle in this ongoing future work project we got going on here, and how do we make it work better for independent workers in the future here. Thank you.